Have you ever thought you knew someone only to discover they were a stranger hiding behind lies? My wife's betrayal didn't just break, it might set me on a path I never imagined. What would you do if you met your wife's lover and he became your best friend? Together, we unraveled secrets darker than I could have dreamed. You won't believe where this story ends. Stay with me, because trust me, you're not ready for the twists ahead. Chapter 1. The Perfect Picture. My name is Michael Rains, and for the longest time, I thought I had it all. A great job as a corporate manager in New York, a cozy apartment in Manhattan, and a wife who seemed perfect in every way. Jennifer was more than just my partner. She was my muse. She painted these incredible canvases, abstract, yet full of emotion, and spent hours volunteering for art therapy programs. Our life together felt like a work of art, beautiful and untouchable. But perfection is often a mask, isn't it? It started with little things, barely noticeable at first. Jennifer was coming home later than usual, blaming project deadlines or last-minute charity events. Her laughter, once so genuine and infectious, now felt forced, like a recording played at the wrong speed. And then there were the calls, late at night when she thought I was asleep. She'd slip out onto the balcony, speaking softly but urgently, as though her voice might shatter the quiet. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe work stress had made me paranoid. But one night, curiosity got the better of me. While Jennifer was in the shower, I checked her phone. Locked. It had never been locked before. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen. I told myself I wouldn't jump to conclusions. I mean, who locks their phone these days? But a seed of doubt had already been planted, and it began to grow. A week later, I found a charge on our joint credit card that I couldn't explain. A dinner reservation at an upscale restaurant I'd never been to. When I asked Jennifer about it, she shrugged it off. "Work dinner," she said, her tone casual. But her eyes betrayed her darting away just a second too quickly. I nodded, pretending to believe her, while my mind raced with questions. That night, as I lay awake beside her, I realized something. Trust is a fragile thing. Once it cracks, it's almost impossible to repair. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the life we'd built together was starting to crumble. Chapter 2. First Cracks. The cracks in our perfect picture only grew deeper. After finding that mysterious dinner charge, I became more observant, scrutinizing every detail of Jennifer's life. It wasn't a conscious decision at first, just a quiet, nagging suspicion that wouldn't let go. But as the days passed, I started to notice patterns I couldn't ignore. Jennifer had always been affectionate, but now her kisses felt hollow, her touches mechanical. She began spending more time away from home, claiming to work on community projects. But when I casually asked which charity she was involved with, she would answer vaguely, deflecting the question with a laugh or a quick change of subject. One evening, while cleaning the apartment, I found an unfamiliar receipt tucked inside her coat pocket. A boutique hotel downtown. The date on it matched one of her supposed late-night work meetings. My chest tightened as I stared at it, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I confronted her that night, but she was too quick with her excuse. "Oh, that? It's from Stacy's birthday party last week. We rented a room for drinks after dinner," she said, her smile disarming. But her eyes were daring me to challenge her. Instead of pressing further, I decided to dig deeper. If Jennifer was lying to me, I needed proof. The next day, I took the afternoon off work and followed her. I felt like a villain in my own marriage, tailing the woman I once trusted with my life. She left the apartment around noon, dressed impeccably, and headed to a cafe on the west side. I stayed back, watching from a distance as she greeted a man at one of the outdoor tables. He wasn't someone I recognized, tall, broad-shouldered, with a confident smile that seemed to light up the entire street. They sat close, too close, laughing like they were the only two people in the world. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of anger, hurt, and something I couldn't quite name. For hours, I sat in my car, watching them. He leaned in, brushing her hand with his, and I clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. They eventually left together, walking arm in arm down the street. It felt like I was suffocating, like the life I'd built was crumbling right in front of me, and I was powerless to stop it. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over in my mind. Who was this man? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, why? Why wasn't I enough? I didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was clear. This wasn't going to end without a fight. Chapter 3. Meeting the Lover. The next morning, I made a decision. If I was going to confront this, I needed to know who this man was. No assumptions, no blind rage. I needed facts. I followed Jennifer again a few days later, this time with a plan. She met him at the same cafe, and after they parted ways, I tailed him. He walked confidently, like a man who owned the city, oblivious to my presence. He stopped outside an office building, an IT firm based on the sign outside. His name, as I would later find out, was Tom Carter. Tom wasn't just some fling. He had the look of a man who'd been through life's battles and come out stronger for it. Ruggedly handsome, sharp-dressed, with a smile that seemed to carry secrets. I waited for him to leave work that evening, then did something I never thought I'd have the guts to do. I introduced myself. It was at a bar a few blocks away from his office. I approached him casually, pretending it was a chance encounter. "You look like a whiskey guy," I said, sliding onto the bar stool next to him. He smirked, lifting his glass in a silent toast. "Good guess," he said. "Name's Tom? You?" "Michael," I replied, shaking his hand. The irony was almost laughable. The man I was shaking hands with was sleeping with my wife, and he had no idea who I was. Over the next hour, we talked. He was surprisingly likable, funny, intelligent, and charismatic. The kind of guy you'd want to have a drink with. He told me about his job, his hobbies, even a bit about his past. What struck me the most was how guarded he was when it came to relationships. He avoided any mention of a significant other, skillfully changing the subject every time it came up. As the evening wore on, I found myself torn. Part of me wanted to punch him, to yell at him for what he was doing. But another part of me wanted to know more. Was he just another victim of Jennifer's lies, or was he complicit? When the opportunity came, I took a gamble. I casually mentioned Jennifer's name, watching his face carefully. For the briefest moment, his confident demeanor faltered. A flicker of recognition flashed in his eyes before he quickly masked it. "Jennifer?" he asked, his tone neutral. "Yeah," I said, my heart pounding. "She's my wife." The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, he just stared at me, as if trying to process what I'd said. Then, to my surprise, he let out a low, bitter laugh. "Well," he said, swirling the ice in his glass, "this just got interesting." Chapter 4. A Deal with the Devil. Tom's reaction caught me off guard. I had expected anger, denial, maybe even a fistfight. But instead, he just leaned back in his chair and studied me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "So," he said, breaking the silence, "you've been following me, huh?" I nodded, deciding there was no point in denying it. I needed to know who you were, and now that I do, I want answers. Tom took a sip of his whiskey, his gaze never leaving mine. "Fair enough. But I've got questions too. Like why your wife never mentioned she was married." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. She hadn't told him. He wasn't just some sleazy homewrecker. He was another victim of her lies. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Over the next hour, we laid our cards on the table. Tom told me how he met Jennifer at an art gallery event 6 months ago. She had been charming, enigmatic, and completely single at least. That's what she led him to believe. They started seeing each other regularly, and she painted a picture of herself as a lonely artist looking for connection. "She's good," Tom admitted, shaking his head. "I bought every word she said. But now, it all makes sense. The disappearing acts, the half-truths, I should have known." We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our thoughts. Then, an idea began to form in my mind. It was risky, borderline insane, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. "What if we turned the tables on her?" I asked, breaking the silence. Tom raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean," I said, leaning closer, "what if we work together to expose her? Make her pay for what she's done to both of us?" He stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face. "You know," he said, "I've always been a fan of poetic justice. Count me in." The deal was struck that night, sealed with a handshake and 2 more rounds of whiskey. We were an unlikely duo of men betrayed by the same woman, united by a shared goal. We spent the next few hours planning our strategy. Tom had connections in the tech world that could help us gather evidence, while I had access to Jennifer's personal life that would allow us to stay one step ahead of her. As the night wore on, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, determination, and a twisted sense of satisfaction. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had control over the situation. Jennifer thought she could play us, but she had no idea what was coming. By the time we left the bar, Tom and I weren't just co-conspirators, we were allies. And as I walked home that night, a dark thought crossed my mind. Maybe Jennifer had underestimated both of us. Chapter 5. Laying the Trap. The next morning, I woke with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The plan Tom and I had pieced together over whiskey and bitterness was more than just revenge, it was justice. Jennifer had taken pieces of both our lives, and we were going to take them back. Step 1 was surveillance. Tom's tech skills came in handy here. He had access to software that could retrieve deleted messages, track locations, and even intercept emails. I felt a pang of guilt as we crossed these lines, but it was drowned out by the burning need for answers. Jennifer's phone, always glued to her side, became our key. While she showered that evening, I accidentally knocked it off the nightstand. The cracked screen was enough of an excuse for her to leave it at a repair shop the next day, one that Tom had a connection with. Within hours, we had a treasure trove of texts, emails, and photos. What we found made my blood boil. Messages to Tom, of course, filled with the same poetic lies she had fed him. But there were other cryptic exchanges with an unknown number that hinted at a deeper betrayal. One message stood out. "We're close. He suspects nothing. Keep everything ready." It didn't take long for me to realize she wasn't just lying about her affair, she was planning something bigger. Tom was equally stunned. "This isn't just infidelity," he said, pacing in his apartment as we went through the messages. "This is a setup, but for what?" We needed more. Over the next week, I played my role as the unsuspecting husband to perfection, while Tom kept digging. It didn't take long for him to uncover the identity of the mystery number. His name was Marcus Rita, shady businessman, with a record for fraud, embezzlement, and extortion. Jennifer was tied to him in ways I couldn't begin to understand, but one thing was clear. She was up to her neck in something dangerous. Step 2 of the plan was to confront Jennifer not directly, but subtly, in a way that would make her feel cornered without realizing she was being watched. I started asking questions, innocuous ones that made her pause. "How's the gallery project going?" I'd say, watching her flinch at the mention of her fake commitments. Or, "Have you seen that new restaurant downtown? We should go sometime." I knew it was one of her meeting spots with Marcus. The tension began to show. Jennifer, usually so composed, started making mistakes. She double-booked plans, forgot details of her own stories, and avoided eye contact more and more. It was like watching a house of cards wobble under the weight of a sudden breeze. The final piece fell into place when Tom discovered a date circled in Jennifer's planner. A gallery auction scheduled for 2 weeks from now, an event I hadn't heard a word about. Tom and I agreed that this would be our moment to strike. As the days passed, I found myself torn between anger and a strange sense of satisfaction. Jennifer thought she had control, but she was walking straight into our trap. The lies she had so carefully constructed were about to come crashing down, and I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when they did. Chapter 6. The Auction's Shadow. The night of the gallery auction arrived, draped in an air of sophistication and deceit. The venue was a sprawling modern space on the Upper East Side, with white walls that reflected the glow of chandeliers above. Wealthy patrons sipped champagne, murmuring about the value of abstract works they didn't understand. Jennifer had outdone herself with the event. She moved through the crowd like a queen, her crimson dress commanding attention. But tonight, her crown would topple. Tom and I arrived separately, each blending into the crowd. My heart pounded as I scanned the room, taking in the art, the people, and most importantly, Jennifer. She was radiant, laughing easily with guests, as if her world weren't about to collapse. I felt a sick twist of anger and admiration. How could she be so confident when everything she'd built was a lie? Tom had managed to secure an invite through one of his connections, posing as a tech consultant interested in investing in art. Meanwhile, I played the dutiful husband, staying in the background but watching her every move. It didn't take long to spot Marcus Reed. He was taller than I'd imagined, with slicked back hair and a smug smile that screamed arrogance. He and Jennifer stood close, their whispered conversation filled with an intimacy that made my blood boil. But this wasn't the time to let emotions take over. Tom and I had synchronized every detail of the evening. He had hacked into the auction's database earlier in the week, uncovering a list of forged pieces Jennifer and Marcus planned to sell. Their scheme was simple: sell counterfeit art to unsuspecting buyers, funnel the profits, and disappear before anyone caught on. It was bold, reckless, and incredibly dangerous. As the auction began, I moved to the back of the room, where Tom was stationed near a projector connected to the venue's AV system. "You ready?" I whispered. "Born ready," he replied, his fingers flying across the keyboard of his laptop. The plan was to expose everything her lies, the forgery, the connection to Marcus in front of the entire crowd. We had compiled evidence from her texts, bank transfers, and emails. And Tom had created a presentation that would play on the gallery's massive screen. The room buzzed with excitement as the first few pieces went up for bid. Jennifer stood at the podium, her voice smooth and commanding as she described each artwork. But as the next item appeared on the screen, something unexpected happened. Instead of the painting, an image of one of Jennifer's text messages popped up. It was the message to Marcus, "We're close. He suspects nothing. Keep everything ready." The room fell silent. Jennifer froze, her eyes darting to the screen, then to the crowd. Tom leaned over to me, whispering, "They're starting to notice." The presentation continued, cycling through incriminating texts, emails, and even photos of Jennifer and Marcus at their secret meetings. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, shifting from confusion to outrage. "What is this?" someone shouted. Jennifer tried to regain control. This is a technical error," she stammered, her voice shaking. "Please, everyone, stay calm." But it was too late. Marcus was already heading for the exit, his face pale. Before he could slip away, Tom intercepted him, pulling him aside with a casual but firm grip. "Going somewhere?" Tom asked, his voice low and dangerous. Meanwhile, I stepped forward, locking eyes with Jennifer. For the first time, she looked small, vulnerable, trapped. "Care to explain, Jennifer?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The perfect picture she had painted was shattering, piece by piece, and there was no way to put it back together. Chapter 7. The Fallout. Jennifer stood frozen at the podium, her composed mask crumbling as the weight of the evidence bore down on her. The room was no longer filled with admiration, and polite applause. It was buzzing with whispers, gasps, and the sharp edge of judgment. "Jennifer," I said again, stepping closer, "you owe everyone here an explanation. Or are you finally out of lies?" Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, but there was none. Even Marcus, her supposed partner in crime, had been cornered by Tom and was now being dragged into the center of the crowd. His confident facade had vanished, replaced by a mixture of anger and panic. "Michael, Jennifer finally began, her voice trembling. But I didn't let her finish. "Save it," I snapped. "We all know the truth now. You've been lying to me, to him, to everyone in this room." I gestured to the audience, who were now staring at her with a mix of shock and disdain. Tom, ever the showman, decided to turn up the heat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, raising his voice, "what you're seeing is the real Jennifer. A fraud who's been running a scam with this man." He pointed at Marcus to sell fake art to unsuspecting buyers. The murmurs in the crowd erupted into full-blown chaos. Some guests shouted accusations, while others pulled out their phones, likely recording every humiliating second. Jennifer's face was a storm of emotions, fear, rage, and a flicker of desperation. "You don't understand," she said, her voice rising. "I did this for us, Michael. For our future." I laughed bitterly. "Our future? Don't make me laugh, Jennifer. This was never about us. This was about you and your greed." As security arrived, summoned by the escalating commotion, Jennifer's final act of defiance kicked in. "You're no saint, Michael," she hissed, stepping closer to me. "Don't think for a second you're innocent in this. You were so busy chasing your career, your dreams, that you never saw what I needed." Her words stung, but I refused to let her twist the narrative. "I trusted you," I said, my voice low but firm. "And you threw that trust away." The security guards escorted Marcus out first, his protests echoing through the gallery. Jennifer followed soon after, her head held high despite the chorus of disapproval from the crowd. But I knew the cracks in her armor were deeper than ever. As the room began to settle, Tom turned to me, a satisfied smirk on his face. "Well, that went better than expected." "Yeah," I said, staring at the door Jennifer had just disappeared through. "But it's not over yet." Because as satisfying as it was to see her exposed, I knew Jennifer wasn't the type to go down quietly. And if she thought this was the end of our story, she was sorely mistaken. Chapter 8. Jennifer's counterattack. For a brief moment, I thought it was over. Jennifer and Marcus had been exposed, their lies laid bare in front of everyone who mattered. But the satisfaction was short-lived. Jennifer wasn't the kind of person to slink away quietly. 2 days later, I woke to a barrage of notifications on my phone. Missed calls, voicemails, and messages from friends, colleagues, even strangers. Confused, I opened the first email I saw and my stomach dropped. Attached was a screenshot of a bank transfer a sizable amount deposited into my personal account. The sender? Marcus Reed. Before I could process what I was looking at, another email arrived. This one with a subject line that made my blood run cold. Dirty money and a double life. Attached were documents fake, but convincing linking me to Marcus and Jennifer's forgery scheme. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Jennifer had flipped the script, painting me as the mastermind behind everything. It was a calculated move, designed to discredit me and protect herself. The fallout was immediate. By midday, my employer had called me in for a discussion. The gallery auction scandal had already made headlines, and now my name was being dragged through the mud. "We can't have this kind of attention," my boss said, his tone heavy with disappointment. "Until this is cleared up, we're suspending you." The weight of Jennifer's betrayal hit me all over again. She wasn't just trying to ruin my reputation, she was trying to destroy my life. I called Tom, my voice tight with anger. "She's fighting back," I said. "Yeah, I figured she would," he replied, sounding surprisingly calm. "But don't worry, I've been preparing for this." Tom explained that he had anticipated Jennifer's counterattack and had been quietly gathering additional evidence, not just about the forgery scheme, but about her past. Financial inconsistencies, fabricated credentials, even a connection to another fraud case in a neighboring state. "I wanted to be sure we had something in case she tried to pull this kind of stunt," he said. "And trust me, Michael, we have more than enough to bury her." But even with Tom's reassurance, I couldn't shake the feeling of being one step behind. Jennifer was a master manipulator, and I knew she wouldn't stop until she had completely destroyed me. That night, I found myself replaying everything in my Mindor marriage, her lies, the moment I discovered the truth. It all felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But as the anger and despair threatened to consume me, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let her win. Jennifer had underestimated me once, and I had allowed her to control the narrative for too long. But now it was my turn to take back the reins. The next morning, Tom and I put the final phase of our plan into motion. We reached out to a journalist friend of Tom's who specialized in uncovering corruption and exposing fraud. Together, we compiled a detailed dossier of everything Jennifer and Marcus had done, backed by undeniable evidence. As the story began to take shape, I realized this wasn't just about clearing my name or getting revenge. This was about exposing the truth and ensuring Jennifer couldn't hurt anyone else the way she had hurt me and so many others. Chapter 9. The Expos. 3 days later, the story went live. The headline was bold and damning. The web of lies, forgery, fraud, and betrayal in the art world. The article was everywhere online, in print, even featured on the local news. Tom's journalist friend had done an incredible job weaving the narrative, presenting every piece of evidence we'd gathered. The expose was devastating. It detailed how Jennifer and Marcus had orchestrated their forgery scheme, duping high-profile buyers and laundering money through shell accounts. It also outlined how Jennifer had used her charm and manipulation to build a facade of credibility, all while living a double life. But the part that hit the hardest was the section about me. It wasn't just about clearing my name, it was a raw, honest account of how I'd been dragged into their mess. The article highlighted my innocence and painted me as a victim of Jennifer's deception. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The fallout was immediate. Marcus was arrested within 24 hours of the article's publication, his past crimes catching up to him in spectacular fashion. Jennifer, on the other hand, went into hiding. Her social media accounts disappeared, her phone number went dead, and even her closest friends claimed they hadn't heard from her. But while she tried to disappear, the damage was already done. Her name was plastered across every major news outlet, her reputation shattered beyond repair. People she had once charmed now saw her for what she really was, a liar and a fraud. In the days that followed, the messages started pouring in. Friends and acquaintances reached out to apologize for doubting me. Strangers sent words of support, sharing their own stories of betrayal and resilience. It was overwhelming, but also strangely cathartic. Tom and I met up to celebrate, though the victory felt bittersweet. "You did it," he said, raising his glass of whiskey. "We did it," I corrected, clinking my glass against his. But even as we toasted to our success, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Jennifer was too smart, too cunning to go down without a fight. Sure enough, a week later, I received an email. The subject line was simple: "You won't get away with this." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding as I opened the message. It was from Jennifer, and it was exactly what I expected: angry, venomous, and full of threats. She blamed me for everything, accusing me of ruining her life and promising that she would make me pay. I forwarded the email to Tom and the journalist, adding it to the growing pile of evidence against her. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of the next chapter. Because Jennifer wasn't the type to fade into the background. And if she thought she could scare me into backing down, she had another thing coming. Chapter 10. The Final Confrontation. The email Jennifer sent was just the beginning. The days that followed were filled with a sense of dread that I couldn't shake. It was as though she were a shadow lurking in the background, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. And of course, she would. I had made her an enemy, and a woman like Jennifer never forgives or forgets. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing she had rattled me, but deep down, I could feel the tension building like the calm before a storm. I went about my days trying to rebuild what was left of my life, knowing the battle was far from over. Then, one late afternoon, I got the call. It was from Tom, his voice tight with urgency. "You need to come to my place. Now." I didn't ask questions. I grabbed my jacket and rushed to his apartment, the knot in my stomach tightening with each step. When I arrived, Tom was already waiting for me, pacing back and forth. "We've got a problem," he said, tossing me a folder. "Jennifer has made her move. She's coming after you, Michael. This time, she's playing dirty." I opened the folder to find screenshots of a new set of emails and messages this time, to a law firm. Jennifer had hired a lawyer, and the case she was building against me was devastating. She was accusing me of harassment, defamation, and most alarmingly fraud. She was claiming that I had orchestrated the entire forgery scheme, using her as an unwitting accomplice, and that I had coerced her into a relationship with Marcus Reed. The evidence she had seemed airtight. False, of course, but she had manipulated the narrative so well that even I started to second-guess myself. "She's going all in," Tom said, his face grim. "But we've got something she doesn't know about." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Tom smirked. "Remember the files we found? The ones that didn't just expose her forgery, but her entire history of deceit? The ones that tie her to other fraud cases? I've made sure those are safe. They're going public whether she likes it or not." I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but I knew we couldn't afford to be complacent. Jennifer was a skilled manipulator, and this fight was far from over. The next morning, we sent out a counterstatement to the press. It was strategic, carefully worded to expose Jennifer's lies without giving her the ammunition she needed to turn the tables. We had evidence that would destroy her claims and we were prepared to use it. But Jennifer wasn't going to back down quietly. Later that afternoon, I received a phone call from an unknown number. I picked it up, and her voice filled my ear, colder than I'd ever heard it. "You think you've won, don't you, Michael?" she hissed. "You're nothing but a pawn in my game. And you'll pay for this, trust me." Her words were venomous, but I could hear the desperation in them. Jennifer was losing control, and that was something she couldn't stand. "Let's see who wins this game, Jennifer," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "Because I'm not backing down." With that, I hung up. The next few days were a blur: meetings with the lawyer, conversations with the press, and the growing sense that Jennifer's final move was coming. But I wasn't afraid anymore. We had played the game by her rules long enough. It was time for her to face the consequences of her actions. Chapter 11. The Last Game. The final battle between Jennifer and me wasn't just about exposing her lies anymore, it was about survival. Both of us had played our cards, and now we were in the final round, where every move mattered. Jennifer's last-ditch effort to ruin me was her last act of desperation, but it was also a dangerous one. The press was already buzzing with rumors, and our counterstatements were starting to gain traction. But Jennifer wasn't going to let her empire fall without a fight. The moment she realized she couldn't manipulate the media, she turned to the only weapon left in her arsenal: fear. I received a visit from the police late one night. They showed up at my apartment, flashing their badges, saying they had a warrant to search my place for evidence of criminal activity. Jennifer had filed a report accusing me of threatening her, of harassment, and of being involved in other criminal activities. It was a sickeningly familiar playbook one she had used countless times to manipulate situations in her favor. But this time, I wasn't going to let her win. I stayed calm as the officers searched my apartment, knowing the false accusations would only be a temporary setback. Tom and I had already ensured that every piece of everything that could clear my name was locked away in safe hands. The next morning, I met with my lawyer to discuss the latest developments. "She's trying to put the screws to you," he said. "But don't worry, we have everything we need. She's the one who's in deep trouble now." I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. but I nodded. I had no other choice but to trust that the truth would come to light. As the days went on, the pressure intensified. The media coverage was relentless, and Jennifer's lawyer continued to twist the narrative. But we were ready. Every call, every email, every piece of evidence Jennifer had tried to hide it was all coming to the surface. Her connections, her previous frauds, her manipulation of the art world, every lie she had ever told was exposed in vivid detail. Then, the final blow came. One evening, I received a phone call from the district attorney's office. "Mr. Turner, we've reviewed the evidence you and your lawyer provided, and we're pressing charges against Jennifer Williams for her role in the forgery scheme, as well as additional charges related to fraud, money laundering, and attempted defamation." It was over. The game was finally done. Jennifer had played her card, sand had lost. The news hit the airwaves almost immediately, and Jennifer was officially charged. As I watched the news coverage, a strange sense of finality settled over me. There was no more hiding, no more lies. She was going to pay for everything she had done, and not just to me, but to everyone she had ever manipulated. I never saw Jennifer again after that. She disappeared into the shadows, her name buried under the weight of the crime she could no longer escape. And while I was left with the wreckage of everything she had stolen from Memi Trust, my peace of mind, and my sense of self, I knew I had done the right thing. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't the one we plan. It's the one that happens when the truth finally comes to light, and that's what Jennifer couldn't understand. She thought she could control the narrative. But in the end, the truth was the only thing that mattered. The story of Jennifer and Miov, lies, betrayal, and revenge had finally come to its tragic end. But what remained was a lesson learned in the most painful way. Trust is fragile, and people are often not who they appear to be. The scars from the betrayal would never fully fade, but I had come to terms with one undeniable truth. I had won. And maybe that was all I needed. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, you know how deep the wounds can go. It's easy to feel powerless, like you've lost everything. But remember, the truth always finds its way out. And in the end, justice is served even if it takes a long time to arrive. What do you think? Have you ever been in a situation like this? Or do you think Jennifer got what she deserved? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories like this. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.